Here is how to paint orc vehicles. For this video, we're going to be building and painting some Grot tanks and Grot tank proxies from Forge World, Mezgike, and Cromlech. Thank you to Cromlech for sending me the Goblin Scrap tanks to test and use. If you like what you see in the video, make sure to use the links and discount codes below. I have affiliate links and codes for both Bits of War, which sells Cromlech kits, and Only Games, which sells physical prints of Mezgike models. My brother got me these Forge World Grot tanks for Christmas, and after I made all the tanks, I thought I probably should have filmed that. But preparing, cleaning, and building the Cromlech tanks is very similar. The first step when using the resin models is to clean the mold release off. It's a substance sprayed on molds to keep things from sticking to it. You can get rid of mold release by soaking the models in warm water with a few drops of dish soap for about 15 minutes, and then scrubbing them with a toothbrush. Or you could use a big ultrasonic cleaner filled with warm water and dish soap you bought off Amazon. Honestly though, this only saves time if you buy a lot of resin models like this. Once all the models are squeaky clean, you can get to assembling. One thing to keep in mind of is that resin dust is extremely bad for your health. So I was wearing a dust mask and using water to trap as much dust as possible. I didn't have to sand anything, but wet sanding is the way to go. Wet sanding is when you sand while the thing is wet. It's not a bad idea to do this with an air filter running or a window open. The main thing you have to do is cut off the air vents. I used 3 tools for this. A nice pair of snippers for thin vents and cuts, a heavier duty one you don't mind getting beat up a little for slightly thicker vents, and a hobby saw for the large vents. Again, all while making sure everything is wet. You can typically just saw into things, and once you've gone mostly through it, you can then just snap the piece off. Cleaning these vents is more daunting than difficult, and didn't take too long. I used a sharp hobby knife dipped in water to scrape and cut away any mold lines and flash, which surprisingly there weren't many of. The Forge World Grot tanks had a lot, but in their defense, the molds they used probably have been around for a really long time. Then I glued everything together with super glue. I didn't glue the goblins onto the tank. That way I can paint the tanks and goblins separately. I'm quite impressed with the quality of the Cromlech kit. There was little to no noticeable warping, and the detail was crazy. Just look at the coiled wire on the Zappa. Pretty wild. Another goblin tank you can use as a proxy are the Runt tanks from Mezgike. I'm a big fan of the stuff he makes, and these tanks are no different. The nice thing about working with 3D printed models is that there isn't as much cutting and sanding during the cleanup phase as there is with the resin casted models. Also, you could print out 100 of these if you really wanted to. Putting these together is very similar to the other ones. I love the character both the runts and the tanks have. Look at all these little feet. They have lots of room for adding bits and scrap. Honestly, all 3 options are great and have their advantages. I based all of them on 70mm bases. I've seen people use 80mm, and that looks good too. With all the tanks built, it was time to paint. The first step, as with every model I do, is to zenithal highlight using dark neutral gray, followed by spraying top down with white ink, and then underspraying up from below with red. Then spray the whole shebang with a brown ink that is slightly transparent, which allows the zenithal highlighting to show through. Now you have a great base layer for all the rusty metal we're going to make. Looking back though, you could probably just spray with a dark brown primer, and then zenithal highlight with a lighter brown. Going forward, I'm probably going to do it that way for vehicles to save time by cutting the number of steps down. Also, I did this outside because it was nice out, and this little flycatcher was very interested in what I was doing. At this point, you're ready to start randomly dabbing on browns with a sponge, working your way up to orange. This is to make it look all rusty. Next, dry brush everything with a metallic paint. By this time, you should have a rusty steel looking thing. Next, take a brush you don't mind ruining and start stippling, which is an art term for angrily stabbing, the color of your choice onto the panels, focusing on the center of the panel as to not cover up the rusty edges you just made. But honestly, I barely look at the model during this step. The end result should look like paint that has been chipped away over time. You could also use a soft sponge for this step too. Some areas will have more coverage than others. Again, you're making it so any areas you couldn't reach are nice and rusty and looks like you meant to paint it that way. Again, please use a brush you don't mind ruining or a soft sponge. Then I go back and add more chips and scratches using the paint colors mixed with white or off-white. Once you're happy with how damaged it looks, you can start the tedious task of picking out wires and all that jazz. Another thing that feels right for orc vehicles is graffiti and checkerboards. Let's talk checkerboards first. You can use decals or my new preferred method. I paint the background where I want the checkerboard with white. After that's dry, use one of these Gundam markers to make the checkerboard pattern, creating the checkers. As for graffiti, I like to use a sharp-tipped brush or a fine-tipped Gundam marker. I take my graffiti very seriously. Then I took some dirty down rust effects to add some extra damage to some of the deep recesses and panels. You can add a little water to thin and feather the effect to create more variation. If you went overboard, you can go back in with a steel paint and make some fresh steel poking through. Lastly, paint the base, and you're done. Grand scheme of things, the paint job doesn't take too long, and is actually how I like to paint weathered terrain. I thought it looked good on terrain, so why not models? If you have any questions about how or why I did anything, feel free to ask. I've added links to all the sites where you can get these models, and a few nice little discount codes to Bits of War for the Cromlech tanks, and only games if you want some physical prints of the Mezgite tanks. It's not a competition, but I'm curious which you guys liked the most and what won you over. Big thank you to my patrons for supporting me and giving me the encouragement to make videos. From contacting all the companies, cleaning all the prints, painting, and then filming everything, this video took more effort than normal. So I greatly appreciate it. Alright, that's it. If you enjoyed, feel free to like and subscribe. Leave any suggestions or feedback in the comments below. Alright, bye-bye.